Today's daf we're going to learn is Moed Katan, Daf Kafbet. Just remind everyone, 2 announcements. The Siyum Be'ezrat Hashem will be next Thursday at 7 p.m. Israel time. Note the change in time because we're going to do the Hebrew and the English in the same evening. So the English will be at 7, the Hebrew will be at 8:30. And also the skills class that I'll be teaching, a 4-part skills class on the topic of Tikkun Olam, which again, the idea of the skills class is to be able to help you learn how to address things on your own, what different terms mean, all different methodological points, all while learning in depth some very interesting topics about Tikkun Olam, ways to perfect the world, the betterment of the world, 4 very interesting sugyot from Gittin, which we're going to learn. And it gives us an opportunity to learn together something more in depth than we get to do in Daf Yomi, which is more on the surface. Here we go much more in depth, and all the while gaining skills how to learn Gemara. Today's daf is sponsored by Carol Robinson and Art Gould, in gratitude to Hashem and Carol's medical team and to the caring group of their Hadran Zoom friends. After 3 months of scans, medical procedures, and 2 surgeries, Carol has been declared, Baruch Hashem, cancer-free. Very happy to hear that news. Today's daf is also sponsored by Lisa Wokenfeld to celebrate the birth and brit milah of their grandson, born to Hannah and Jacob Finkel. Mazal tov. And on a sadder note, today's daf is sponsored by the Hadran Zoom family in loving memory of the fathers of Stacy Goodstein, Ashtemker, and Leah Goldford. With deep sadness, we dedicate today's learning to our dear friends, Stacy Goodstein, Ashtemker, and Leah Goldford. We learn in memory of Stacy's father, Jack Goodstein, and we learn in memory of Leah's father, Moshe Ben Bunya Bracha Bella. Our recent learning, so centered around the laws of mourning, highlighted for us the sensitivity with which the Amoraim established mourning practices to help us as we navigate the difficulties of loss. And yet, even with the well-stated customs and laws, the sadness of losing a loved one is overwhelming. Stacy and Leah, we stand in silence with you, virtually holding your hands and offering our comfort with much love and prayer for better times, your Hadran Zoom family. Okay, with that, we will get started for today. We finished yesterday's daf with a braita. I'm going to go back to it because it's going to reappear in our daf today. So it's helpful to review. Tanu Rabbanan, about 6 lines from the bottom. What we were distinguishing yesterday a lot was the difference between the first 3 days of mourning and the rest of the days. And one of the distinctions we made was that if somebody comes from far away, they're not at the burial, or they didn't even know that the person had died, and they show up on the scene a few days later, the Tanakhama made a distinction, depending on whether they happen to live nearby and could have gotten there in time but didn't, versus if they couldn't have gotten there in time. So we said, Avel Shlashai, and then we distinguished between the first 3 days and the second set of days. Bami Makom Karov, if you got there within the first 3 days and you happen to be Makom Karov, so you theoretically could have found out about it even though you didn't, and you could have shown up on time, but you didn't. Monei Mahen, you're still considered with them because you theoretically could have been with them. And if you show up on day 2, so you don't have all 7 days of Shiva at that point. If you come from a farther away place and you couldn't have gotten there in time, then you don't count Shiva with them because there was no way you would have made it in time no matter what. Mikan va'elach, but anyone who shows up after day number 3, you can't just enter Shiva starting from day 3 or 4 and thinking, oh, I'll just join them. No. Doesn't matter what happened. You have to start from day number 1 and count 7. But Rabbi Shimon disagrees with this halacha, and we're going to get back to Rabbi Shimon for a little bit into our daf today. Even if you get there on the 7th day, okay, we're going to have to see at what point in the 7th day. But even if you get there on the 7th day, you join them, okay, as long as you were mimakom karov. Now, we said this is only if, right, we just said, going back to the first halacha, that you can join them if it's within the first 3 days, if you're a mimakom karov. Rabbi Chia bar Abed said the name of Rabbi Yochanan, as long as gadol habayit, which again, some different possibilities, but many people think that what this means is as long as the Shiva that was going on from the beginning included the main family member, okay, like the head of the family. If he was like that, then you go along with that Shiva. Now comes Ibayalhu, a question. The Gemara asks, Halach gadol abayit lebeit hakvarot ma. It's a bit of a debate. We'll go with Rashi's interpretation here, which is a little bit of a simpler interpretation of this question, but it's always interesting when you have a question and there's a question on what exactly the question means. But we'll go with Rashi. I'll just tell you this is only one interpretation of this. But now what happens if, and this is quite common, we're not it's not so common, but it is common, especially with people living in different countries. I know Stacy had this situation where halach gadol habayit lebeit hakvarot ma'am. The main family member went and buried the body, but not everybody went. Okay, apparently in those days there would be haspedim, and they would walk the body to a certain place and do eulogies, and not everyone necessarily went to the cemetery to bury, okay, for the burial. So let's say only the head of the household went to the cemetery to bury. The rest of the family, and we're talking about not, okay, it was an hour burial and that's it. We're talking about potentially a difference of a few days. Let's say they had to bring the body somewhere, right? And nowadays it would be the most obvious, right? People bring bodies to Israel and they travel far. But whatever it might be, this body was brought to some other city. Maybe the family burial plot is far away, and only the head of the household went. So what happens to the rest of the family? They actually start sitting Shiva right away. As soon as, we'll see in a few minutes when exactly they start, but they start before the head of the household and potentially with a few day difference. So what's the situation when the head of the household, because we already just said, if the household is there, then other people who come late go by the head of the household. But here, the head of the household is the one burying the body and won't be back till later. So Tashma, let's learn from the following statement. We're going to see a few things about the Rabbi Yochanan today. So Rabbi Chiya bar Abba says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Afilu halach gadol habayit lebeit hakvarot monei mahen. Even if the head of the household goes to bury and then gets back together with the rest of the family, then he counts with them. So he might have missed a few days of Shiva. So the Gemara says, Monei mahem, what do you mean he counts with them? Hatanya, it says in a Braita, this exact case, and it says, Moneh la'atzmo, he counts for himself. So one source, right, Rabbi Yochanan, who's in Amora, says he counts with them. The Braita, which is always a better source, says he counts on his own. So what's going on here? Lo kasha. This is not difficult because it really depends on the situation. Goes back to this distinction we keep talking about. It all depends on how many days it takes him to bury. If he gets back and it's still within the first 3 days, then he goes along with them. If he gets back after the first 3 days, then he has to start counting on his own. And that's the distinction they make between Rabbi Yochanan, who was talking about he got back a few days later, past the 3 days. Then, Rabbi Yochanan, who said he counts with them, meant that he got back within a few days. But if, right, the Braita was talking about where it took him a longer time to get home. And here they're going to bring a further proof that there were people called the Bnei Tzalponi, whether their father was Tzalponi, the name of the place they were from, unclear what that word is from, but Rav said to these people, if you get home within 3, then you count with them. If you don't get home within 3, then you count on your own. Now we're going to talk about what I mentioned before, which is at what point do they start sitting Shiva? When do we count it from? So Rava told the Bnei Mechosa, Atan delo azlitu batar ar. So you who are not following the body all the way to the cemetery, michima hadritu apaychu mibava da'abula atchilu mani. When you turn your backs on, now it's unclear exactly what this is. Mibava da'abula. Bava da'abula usually means the gate of the city. Here it seems to mean either the gate of the cemetery, or you turn away from the grave, or some people say when you get into the city. Okay, there's a bit of a different interpretation, but then you start counting. And in fact, people who, let's say, bury close to sunset, and they want to count that day as Shiva, there was always a push to start immediately. So that already we learned Mitzad Yom Kikulo, a bit starts the day. So what people tell them at the cemetery, they say, turn your backs to the grave and sit down in a certain spot, so that this turning the back that comes up here, or turning your face, has significance, because it's saying you're basically moving from there into the next stage of Shiva. It's a symbolic kind of thing, even though that's not what they're talking about here, but it's a similar thing about when exactly the Shiva starts. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Now we're going to get back to Rabbi Shimon. Afilu ba b'yom hashvi'i mimakom karov monei mahen. He has this unique opinion that even if you show up on day number 7, you count with everybody, right? You can basically end up with almost no Shiva. So Amar Rabbi Chiya bar Gamda, Amar Rabbi Yossi ben Shaul, Amar Rebbe, v'hu shava u'matzah menachamim etzlo. what happens on the last day of Shiva? Some people come, usually if you have davening in the Shiva house, so they have davening. People sit with the Avelim for 5 minutes or something, and then they get up and go. So it has to be that he showed up at the time there were still people there. As soon as the Menachamim leave, that's basically signifies the end of the Shiva. So when the people leave, that's the end of your Shiva, and we're done. So if the person shows up after that, you can't say, oh, I'm doing Shiva with them because he had no Shiva. Again, you have this issue of you have to have some sort of Shiva. So by Rav Anan, classic Gemara question, Nin aru la'amod v'lo amdu mahu. If they start now, we all know you can notice when you're sitting with people when they sort of make a gesture like they're ready to leave, right? They start stirring in their seat. Okay, we're about to say goodbye. You can tell. So what if they're about to get up when this person walks in and you know that they're ready to leave, basically? Is that considered that they already got up because you know that they're about to get up and that there's really no menachamim anymore? Or do we say, no, until they actually physically get up, it's not considered having gotten up? So what's the answer? Classic Gemara answer, Teku, we don't know. Gemire Chavre de Rabbi Abba bar Chia me Rabbi Abba, the friends of Rabbi Abba, right? I think this is actually not supposed to be Rabbi Abba bar Chia, right? This should just be Rabbi Abba. The friends of Rabbi Abba, there is actually a lot of confusion in the sugya because there's Rabbi Abba and there's Rabbi Abba bar Chia. Okay, so I don't need to confuse the two. Right now, there's a confusion in the text. It should say, the friends of Rabbi Abba learned from Rabbi Abba. Who are these friends of Rabbi Abba? Rabbi Zera. Some people say it was Chavre de Rabbi Zera, mi Rabbi Zera, Umanu, Rabbi Abba. Okay, so it was either Rabbi Zera learned from Rabbi Abba learned from Rabbi Zera. Okay, one of the two. Now, there's a few words missing here. And now, what did they learn? That Rabbi Abba berei de Rabbi Chia, who's a different person. What they learned is that Rabbi Abba, the son of Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Yochanan said, passed down in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, halakha ke Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel b'treifot, halakha ke Rabbi Shimon be'evel. Okay, let me just make it clear because the names are very confusing. Either Rabbi Zera learned from Rabbi Abba learned from Rabbi Zera, that Rabbi Abba to be distinguished from a different Rabbi Abba. What they said, one of them said, we don't know which one, said that Rabbi Abba, the son of Chia, learned from Rabbi Yochanan 2 psak halachas. He said, number one, we hold like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel on a treifa issue, which we're going to see in a minute what that is. And we hold like Rabbi Shimon in Avelu, which is our issue. Rabbi Shimon, that if you show up on day number 7, it actually counts as your whole Shiva. Okay, as long as you came from Makom Karov, right? You were in a close place for whatever reason, you didn't know or you didn't show up till later, you count Shiva with everyone else. Again, as long as you showed up and there were still people sitting Shiva there and there were still visitors. So now the Gemara wants to understand this psak because we understand Ki Rabbi Shimon ba'avel hadamaran. That's our sugya. We understand that. Ki Rashbag b'treifot. What's this halacha of Rashbag when it comes to treifa? So let's explain first what a treifa is. A treifa is an animal that was sick. Okay, had some sort of, not necessarily sick, but had some sort of something wrong with the animal. All different types are listed. We'll learn this all in Chulin. Something to look forward to. Those who remember Chulin know why I'm saying that. So you have some sort of, there's something wrong with the animal. There's a list of what treifas are that are considered problematic. If one were to do a kosher shchita on that animal, the animal is not kosher to eat. Okay, generally it's something that would have caused the death of the animal within 12 months. And that's basically called, we call things treif. Treif is not the proper term. Treif, we usually mean it's not kosher. But this is actually kosher. It's just you can't eat the animal if it had something wrong with it. Okay, so you can't, even if you did a kosher shchita and it was a kosher animal, it's called a treifa. Okay, so what's this issue that we hold like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel? Ditnan, okay, kirashbag v'treifot, where do we know this? As it says in the following Mishnah. B'nei me'ayim shenikvu, the intestines that have a hole in it. Okay, there's a tear inside the intestine, in the wall of the intestines. There's a hole. Normally, if there's a hole in the intestines, that's pretty bad, called a treifa. However, if lecha sotamtan, if there was liquid, it's unclear what we mean here by liquid, whether it's a membrane, whether it's fat that comes from the intestine, sotamtan, and it sealed up the hole. So it's a hole that was basically, there was a perforation and it got fixed from the inside of the animal, basically fixed it. It blocked up the opening, kshera. Rashbag says, Divrei Rashbag, he says this is fine, kosher animal, because it's basically fixed. It's not a problem. My lecha, what is this lecha? Amar Rav Kahana, shirka deme'aya denafik avgav duchta. It's this fatty substance in the, or maybe a membrane, again, it's not exactly clear what it is, that's inside the intestines, that when you push out, when you kind of put pressure, it comes out, okay? Right? You can think about pus that comes out of a wound, I don't know, some sort of, right? Some sort of mucousy material, substance that comes out when you push on it, and that's what we're talking about that could theoretically fix it up. Amal mandehu. Okay, so after this statement was said, right, either by Rabbi Zera or by Rabbi Abba, that Rabbi Abba Bar Chia, a different Rabbi Abba, said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, these two psikot halacha. Some guy, we don't know what his name is, he's called some guy, Amar mandehu, a mishahu, a somebody, said, Halavai, right? I wish I had the merits to go up to Israel and hear this directly from his mouth. Now, why? We don't know yet. We'll see when we get there. Kislik, he actually gets the merit to do that. And then he goes to Israel, because this is all passed down in Babylonia. He goes to Israel. Rabbi Abba, his dream comes true. He finds Rabbi Abba, the son of Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Amar le, he says to him, Amar, did you really say, he obviously didn't really believe it. Did you really say, halacha kerashbag betrefot? It's true that you said that. That's what they're saying in Babylonia. Amar le, Anna, ein halacha amare. What are you talking about? I said the halacha is not like, right? They missed the word not. Talked about broken telephone the other day with the Amora, right? That was in the room. Forget about here. It, crossed over from Israel to Babylonia with obviously a mistake, a huge mistake. So what are you talking about? I said the halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Treifa. Ki Rabbi Shimon ba'avel mai. So now he asks, well, do you hold like Rabbi Shimon when it comes to avelut? Amar le, plug teninu. He says, well, that's a machloket, okay, which sounds like he's not actually saying I hold this way, although he did pass it down in Rabbi Yochanan's name, and in a minute he's going to say what Rabbi Yochanan holds. De itmar, as it is said, Rav Chisda amar halacha, v'chein amar Rabbi Yochanan halacha. Rav Chisda and Rabbi Yochanan both say the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon and Abel, but Rav Nachman amar ein halacha. There happens to be a dissenting opinion. However, he does say here that Rabbi Yochanan says the halacha is, so I guess that was right. That halacha, at least Rabbi Yochanan says halacha Rabbi Shimon ba'avel. And now the Gemara tells us what's the conclusion. What do we do? Okay, so in the end, we hold like the corrective version. We don't hold like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel when it comes to treifa, meaning that wouldn't be a kosher animal. And halacha Rabbi Shimon ba'avel, we do hold that way. Why do we hold that way? Even though there's a machloket about it. We keep seeing this over and over again. Shmuel says we always paskin leniently when it comes to avelut, and therefore we're going to be lenient about this issue. Now we're going to have a long braita that will take us almost to the end of the daf, which we're going to interrupt here and there with comments of the Gemara. It's very easy structure. We're basically going to go through a whole list of things. You can find it on the sheet on the site, also on the chart in today's daf. We're going to now see a whole bunch of things, and I'll mention also some pictures of some of this, where we're going to distinguish, before we distinguish, let's say 3 days and 7, the rest other days of the Shiva. Now we're going to distinguish between someone sitting Shiva for a parent and someone sitting Shiva, or not necessarily sitting Shiva morning, because we talk about different morning periods, for a parent and for somebody else, okay? Someone, other relative that you're sitting Shiva for, that you mourn for, different from parents. We're going to talk about all different issues that come up here. Ala metim kulam, about all other, metim kulam is going to be the term used for everyone else other than your parent that you're mourning for. Madche mitato hareze meshubach. If you rush the burial, that's the best. In other words, you don't do a lot of eulogies. The assumption is, even though it's a little bit strange assumption, that you don't have as much to eulogize when it's not your mother and father, and therefore better to rush the burial. Alaviv alimo hareze meguneh. It's disgusting or inappropriate if you do that for a parent, because it's appropriate to eulogize your parent properly. Haya erev Shabbat or erev Yom Tov. There's only one exception. If it was erev Shabbat or erev Yom Tov, then hareze meshubach, better to rush the burial. Sheino se'ela lichvod aviv imo, because it's all whole reason you're doing this is for the respect of your parents. And if it's Erev Shabbat, so some people say the issue is your parents would prefer you get home for Shabbat, and not end up desecrating Shabbat by accident. Or what it means is that we're worried that if you don't rush it, you might miss your opportunity to bury before Shabbat. And then what will happen? Then the parent will have to, the body will have to wait a long time. And that we didn't mean push it off a long time. We just meant, a few hours, but now it's have to push it off by a day or two. Al kol hamitzim kulam, ratza mema'et b'isko, ratza ino mema'et, al aviv al imo mema'et. When it comes to anybody else, you should try to basically, you can limit your work if you want, you don't have to. When it comes to a parent, you have to limit your work hours. And what are we talking about? Didn't we say you can't work? Right? Didn't we say an Avel is not allowed to work at all? What are we talking about? We're talking about Shiva. Some people think we're talking about Shiva. How can you explain it? Then some people say we're talking about Shloshim, and that after Shiva, we mean you still shouldn't do a lot of work. If it was a parent, if it wasn't a parent, you can choose. That's one way of reading this. Another way of reading it is saying, no, we're talking about even within the things that are permitted. Remember, we learned about Davar Ha'aved and things like that. Remember, there was a whole list of things, just like we have by Chol Moed, that you can do even when you're in Shiva. Even within that, if it's for a parent, you really shouldn't. Okay, that's in the second way. A third way is to distinguish between asakim, which is what it said here, which is like business dealings, rather than melacha, which is labor. So if you're a labor worker, like you work in the fields, that we already said you can't do. But here we're talking about maybe just selling, making a business deal, that maybe you can do in Shiva. And here it comes to tell you, well, not if it's a parent. And if it's not your parent, then, better not to, but theoretically you could. So 3 different possibilities about how to understand this. Al kol hamitzim kulan. I know we talk about this all the time, but I always like to stress it, which is since the Gemara isn't clear about what it means, you can come to majorly different halachic conclusions based on different interpretations in the Gemara, which is exactly what leads to many different customs in many areas of halacha, or not even customs, but different halacha. This one says that's the halacha, this one says that's the halacha, because it all depends on how you read these words. These words are always open to interpretation. Al kol hamitzim kulan, ratza choletz, ratza eno choletz, al aviv al imo choletz. We're talking now about this mitzvah of lachlot. What do we mean? Some people think this is talking about taking off your shoes. Most people don't think that, because that everyone does. But they're talking about this custom of taking off your shirt, okay, which is basically they would remove, after they tore kriya, they would then remove the shirt from over the shoulder. Okay, we'll see a few different customs about what shoulder, and that we'll see very much later. But was this custom? The Rama already writes, as we've seen a bunch of times in the Rama, which is also just interesting in and of itself. The Rama is Moshe Israelish, who writes his comments on the Shulchan Aruch, which is more representative of the Ashkenazi psak rather than the Shulchan Aruch, which is more of a Sfaradi psak. He writes, he wrote in many places already that we've talked about, which is we no longer do this, okay? So, right, if you've never seen anyone pull their shirt off their shoulder, it's because we don't do this anymore, okay? A lot of these customs of Avilut just changed over time for whatever reason. Either a lot of this had to do with what was customary about clothing, minhagim, customs, and I guess just people stopped doing those kind of things. It would be a little strange for people to walk around without a shirt over one shoulder, right? It's not something you could see why maybe it ended. But it did exist at that point, and it says here, if you want to, you can, but you don't have to. We'll talk about women also, right? It's definitely not modest for women. I assume it was only men who did this and not women. There's a lot of things that come up with clothing you're going to see that's different for women than for men because of tzniut issues. We'll see soon with Kriya. We're going to talk about a difference. Now the Braita tells us, because we're still in this Braita, there was a big gadol ador, okay, as we say, right, a huge Torah scholar of the generation. Shemet aviv ubikesh lachlotz. Father died and he was going to take his shirt off his shoulder. Ubikesh gadol ador acher imo lachlotz. Now, out of respect for him, there was another gadol ador there who said, "Oh, well, if he takes off his shirt off his shoulder, I'm going to take off my shirt off my shoulder as well to show my empathizing with him." V'nimna v'lo chalatz. So the first gadol ador said, "That's not going to be appropriate. That I'm going to make this other gadol ador walk around without a shirt on his shoulders. So I'm not going to do it at all." So even though here you see a conflict of interest, he's supposed to do it for his parent. However, because there's this issue of having another Talmid Chacham walk around in a disrespectful manner, he wasn't willing to do it. Now the question becomes, stopping the Braita for a minute, Amar Abaye, Who was the Gadol Adol and who was the one that was with him? Gadol Adol, Rebbe. It was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who was the one who was sitting Shiva. Gadol Ador She'imo was Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha. Some people say it was the opposite. Gadol Ador Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha. The one who was sitting Shiva was Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha. Gadol Ador She'imo, the one who was with him, was Rebbe. Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha didn't want to do it because of Rebbe. So Bishlama, now we're going to say, wait, one of these makes a lot more sense than the other. Why? Bishlama Lamanda Amar Gadol Ador She'imo was Rebbe. And it wasn't Rebbe sitting Shiva. He was the one with him. That makes more sense. Why? Hainu dinim navalo chalatz. Now, until we see the second one, we're not going to really understand why this one makes sense. But the point is, it could theoretically be that Yaakov bar Acha wanted to do it. And Rebbe said, oh, I don't want you to do it. It will not be respectful. The opposite. It was Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha was sitting Shiva, and Rebbe was the one who wanted to pull his shirt off his shoulder out of respect for Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha. Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha said, no, I'm not going to do that. That fits in. Could be theoretically okay. But here you're going to see the problem. Ela l'manda amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha, amaynim navalo chalatz, rashbag nasihava, v'kule'am m'chayve l'mechlatz. Who was the father of Rebbe? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. What was his job? Remember, Rabbi Yehuda's Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. His father was also the Nasi. Nasi is the prince, the leader. Prince is not the greatest translation, but he was the leader of the people. And because of that, we'll see later in the Daf, everyone in the community is required to take their shirt off their shoulder. So if that's the case, then the story doesn't make sense. Because if Rabbi Yehuda Nasi pulls off his shirt, and then Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha wants to do it out of respect for Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, oh, I'm not going to do this because it's not respectful for him. What do you mean? He's supposed to do it regardless of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He's supposed to do it because the Nasi died. And he's supposed to show respect by taking off his shirt off his shoulder. So the story doesn't make sense according to that reason. And therefore, they end with Kasha. It really is difficult. We don't have an answer to this question. By the way, this is a bit of a rare Bishlama. Usually a Bishlama structure is like, this makes sense, but this doesn't make sense. And they almost always they have an answer, a resolution. In this case, they end without a resolution. A Bishlama usually ends with a resolution, how it could make sense. Back to the Braita. Al kol hamitim kulam, for all other people, mistaper la'achar 30 yom. After 30 days, you can get a haircut. But al aviv alimo, ad shigaru bo chaverav. You can't just get a haircut when the shloshim ends. You have to wait till somebody says, wow, you look really disheveled, disgusting, right? Time to get a haircut. So for a parent, you have to wait till somebody does that. For other krovim, other relatives, you don't. Al kol hamitim kulan, nichnas lebeit hasimcha la'achar 30 yom. For all other relatives, you can go into a beit simcha. We're going to have to define exactly what is a beit simcha. You can go to some celebratory event. Let's just call it that right now. La'achar, after 30 days. Alaviva alimo la'achar yud bet chodesh. For a parent, you have to wait 12 months, right? This is very common. We know people don't go to weddings or other things for a whole year after. Amar Rabba bar bar Chana. Rabba bar bar Chana now says something. Again, it's very unclear what he says, because he says, ula simchat mireut. So we can explain what he says, which is basically a social gathering. Okay, we're going to distinguish between a social gathering and a wedding, let's say, right? A sudat mitzvah, we would call it. There's reshut things like just a bunch of friends getting together to have a party. And there's things that are mitzvah, like a sudat mitzvah, any kind of sudat mitzvah. So, a wedding would be the easiest example. So now the problem is, what does Rabbi bar Chana say? He says, and this is for a simchat mireut, a social gathering. What this is, we don't know what he means, because we just said, right, for you could do it after shloshim alavivimo, after 12 months. We don't know what he means here about a social gathering. So some people say that what he's saying is, we're going to be more strict with a social gathering than with a wedding, because a wedding, there's a mitzvah involved. So let's say what he's probably saying is, if it's any regular relative, after 30 days, you can go to you can go to a wedding, but you can't go to a social gathering, okay? Because a wedding is a mitzvah and a social gathering is not. Some people say it's the exact opposite. A social gathering is not as happy as a wedding, right? Think about it. The most happy occasions are weddings. Specifically, a wedding you can't go to, but you could just go to a social gathering. So again, depending on how you interpret this, you come to the opposite halachic conclusion about what is actually permitted. But the Gemara asks on him and says, wait a minute, meitive, ulisimcha ulimereut shloshim yom. So by the way, it doesn't really matter, because in the end, we reject Rabbi Bar Chana. So halachically, it's not really relevant, his distinction, but it is interesting to think about what distinction was he trying to make. But a Braita says, Simcha and Mireut, meaning Simcha is a mitzvah and Mireut is a social gathering, Shloshim Yom. It's all 30 days, it's all the same. Kasha. And in fact, that raises difficulty against what Rabbi Bar Chana said. Ula Simcha, a Meimer had a different version. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana. So now we're going to read the whole sugya with a different version. Rabbi Bar Chana didn't say what we thought he said. He said, Ula Simchat Mireut mutar likanes la'alter. He wasn't talking about after Shloshim. He was talking, and then now, again, we don't know what he said in the first version, whether he was being more lenient or more strict about a Simchat Mireut, but according to this version, he said, you can even go to a social gathering immediately after the Shiva ends. Forget about Shloshim. You can go right after Shiva, because we don't really view that as true Simcha. V'hatanya, to which they ask in this version also, but doesn't the Braita say, L'simcha Shloshim, u'le'meriut Shloshim, meaning both 30 days. Lo kashya, haba arisuta, haba puranuta. What are these terms, arisuta and puranuta? Puranuta, milashon lifroa. Lifroa, achov, is to give back something you owe. So now we're going to learn a little bit about social gatherings in those days. So sometimes they did social gatherings in people's houses. And what they would do is they would rotate every month or something like that. It would be in someone else's house. So if it's the first one, that's the arisute. If it's the first one, then, and it comes up in your shloshim, then you say, thanks, but no thanks, I'm not doing it this month. Okay, I'm not going to host, right? Someone else can host, or we'll push it off for a month or something like that. But if they already started the cycle and they've been to your house and your house and your house, and it's my turn, and my turn happens to be in my shloshim, since I owe you basically because you've already hosted, and it's unfair if I say, well, I'm not hosting this month, then you can actually do it even in your shloshim, which is fascinating to think about, right? That they allow you, because this social structure and this kind of IOU kind of thing, they are going to allow you to make this social gathering in your house during your shloshim, in this way. So it's very interesting to see. Anyway, that's a little kind of a view into the parties and their society. Okay, right. I like that Julie wrote, right? It sounds very Roman. It makes sense in terms of the context. Al kol hamitzim kulan. Now we're getting into different distinctions between parents and other relatives. Same thing, but mostly about tearing kriya. Now we're going to see a whole bunch of different things. Al kol hamitzim kulan korea tefach. Okay, how much do you have to tear? A tefach, a handbreadth. Alaviv alimo ad shigale libo. You have to actually reveal your heart. This is why, by the way, we tear kriya. I don't know if everyone does, but I know it's customary to do kriya for a parent on the left side, because that's where the heart is, and the other relatives on the right side. Okay, that's a custom. Where do you get this from? There has to be a tefach. It's talking about David after Yonatan and Shaul die, and he tears kriya for them. So it says he holds on to his cloak and he tears it. If he's going to hold on to something, yes, but we're talking about something significant, which means it was a tefach. Now we're going to talk about what you have to tear kriya on. Dressed properly for the occasion, even though I wasn't planning this, but I'm wearing 2 layers here, right? So you see, there's a shirt underneath a shirt. So if I had to tear kriya, I would have to tear both. Okay, for a regular karov, just one. Okay, just the elyon, the outer one. Alaviv alimo koreat kulam. And a parent, you have to tear them all. Okay, let's say you're wearing 12 layers. You have to tear down all of them. But a pikarsuto enama akevet. Okay, again, we have a term that we don't exactly know what it is. So different interpretations. Some people say it's the outer one, some outer cloak they wore. Some people say it's the undergarments. Big debate about what it is. But the point is, even though you're supposed to, if you don't, it's okay. The rule here is the same for men and women. Okay, if women were right, thinking before we talked about maybe a difference of women. Shimon ben Elazar Omel, but he adds, Haisha korat tachton. She does tear all the way through. However, machzirato la'achoreha v'chozeret v'korat et elyon. She would basically tear them all, but then turn the under one around so that her body's not revealed underneath. So it is torn, but you don't see it. Okay, and then the outer one is torn in the front. Al kol hamitzim kulan. Here we get to something that, again, it's a little confusing what they mean, many different interpretations, and there's pictures if you want to look. which obviously only show one opinion. Ratza mavdil kamei safa shelo. Ratza ino mavdil. If he wants to tear it on the seam at the top by the neckline, you can, but you don't have to. Alaviva limo mavdil, but on a parent you have to. What it seems to be saying, again, different interpretations. Either if you tear by the neckline, then you're going to basically tear down. That's the way we generally do kriya. But if you don't tear on the neckline, you could tear like in the middle, right? Just let's say tear in the middle of the garment. Just tear there. So the point is, if it's for a parent, you have to tear from the top and basically have like a big tear there. For another relative, you don't have to. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, if you tear it in the middle, again, going with my interpretation, the one I brought up here, if you tear it in the middle of the garment, it's not considered a tear at all, even for a different relative. Where do we get that from? So again, break in the Braita. Amar Rabbi Avahu, my time of the Rabbi Yehuda. What's his reason? This is Elisha when Eliyahu goes up to the heavens, right? He gets taken away, he kind of dies, but doesn't really die, or we don't know. But when that happens, he tears it. And what does it say? He tears it into two. So they say, once you say he tears it, isn't it obvious it's in two? Because you tear something, there's two parts. So they say, they say it looks like it's torn in two. In other words, when you tear this tear going down my shirt, I don't actually have two, but it looks like two, it's split. If I just make a tear in the middle, it doesn't look like two separate pieces. It just looks like a big hole. So that's where he learns it from. We had this already, this debate. Can you fix the tear? That's litachot. But sholel means you can stitch it up, not very well, but a little kind of, fix. Can you do a small fix? So that you could do after Shiva, and you can fix it up entirely after Shloshim. But alaviv alimo sholel achar shloshim ve'eno ma'achel ha'olam. On a parent, you can only do this sholel, the basting, the fixing it, only after 30 days, and you can never fix it. But you can't ever stitch it up so it looks like new. Vayisha, again, we get to a distinction between a woman, again, because it's not sanua that you walk around with clothing that's torn, she's allowed to do it immediately. Okay? Okay, that's the end of the bright. But the Gemara is not satisfied with all the differences. They're going to bring two more differences that are passed down by different people in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Al kol hametim. You can do it by hand, or you can do it with a scissor or a knife or something like that. Alaviv alimo biyad. By a parent, you have to do it by hand. Generally, what we do is we cut. It's not so easy to tear by hand, so we cut a little with a scissor, and then we pull the big tear down by hand. This isn't clear what this is talking about. Is it talking about inside or outside? Bifnim means inside, bibachutz means outside. The inside and outside of the garment, or does it mean inside and outside your house, or in a public place or in a private place? So many people explain, I'll explain it that way, which is, for all your other relatives, you could tear kriya inside. For a parent, you do it more publicly. Amar Rav Chisda, v'chein l'nasi. He says a nasi, right, the leader of the people, is treated when he dies the same as if it's one's parent. That goes back to what we saw earlier with if the nasi had died, he would have done it for the nasi. Meitive. So now they say, wait a minute. It says in a Braita, lo hushvu la'avivu li'imo ela li'ichloi bovad. They're not like the father and the mother, except for the issue of the stitching, that you can't fix it up ever entirely. My lavafilu linasi. Doesn't this mean even the nasi is different from the father and mother and all these other things? So they say, sorry, where did I lost my place? Lo, livar minasi. No, it's talking about other people, but not the nasi. Okay, meaning a nasi is really treated like the parent. That Braita wasn't referring to a nasi, it was referring to other people. Nisiya shchiv. Okay, it happened, there was a situation, the nasi died. Amale Rav Chisda, the Rav Hanan Baal Rava, or maybe his name is a little bit different, but comes Rav Chisda and he says, Kifi asita bekum ale va'ach ve'kriya la'alma. Turn over this mortar, stand on top of it, go into a very public place, and show that you're tearing kriya to everybody. Okay, you wanted to do this public display of kriya. Al chacham choletz miyamin. Okay, now we're back to this chalitza, taking off the shirt. Chacham you do it. If a Talmid Chacham dies, you do it on your right side, your right shoulder. Al Av Beitim Mismol, on the left side, right this way. If you see someone walking around like this, you know either the Nasi died, either the Chacham died or the Av Beitim, depending which arm. Al Nasi Mikan Mikan. If it's the Nasi, then you do it on both sides. Okay, you end up walking around without a shirt on. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. Chacham Shemet, we're going to see more distinctions between a Chacham, a Nasi, and an Av Beitin. Okay, the Av Beitin is the head of the court. Nasi was kind of the head of the people, almost like the president of Israel, like a figurehead type thing. Okay, so Tanu Rabbanan, Chacham Shemet, Beit Midrasho Batel. So if a Talmid Chacham dies, his whole Beit Midrash doesn't go to the Beit Midrash, they go to the funeral, basically it means. Av Beitin Shemet, Kol Batei Midrashot Sheb'iro B'telim. If he's the Av Beitin, then, right, the head of the court in the city, all the Batei Midrashot in the city stop. Everybody comes to the funeral. When they go into the shul, they change their places. They need to show something's off here, something's not right. The north, right, in the north side and the south side, people switch with each other. Nasi Shemet, if a Nasi dies, Batei Midrashot kulam b'tilim. Now it seems like beyond your city, the whole, right, the whole country or the whole area, everyone stops. Ubnei HaKnesset nichnesim lebeit HaKnesset. Okay, what exactly the Bnei HaKnesset are is a good question. But they all go into the shul. V'kor'in shiv'a v'yotzim. They read 7 aliyot. Some people say this must have been on Shabbat. Okay, they read from the Torah and then they go out. In other words, they don't daven together b'tzibur. That's fascinating, right? That they stopped Tefillah b'tzibur because of this, but they do read the Torah in the community. Again, this sounds like it's Shabbat. Okay, we're going to see further on some other things about this. We're kind of stopping in the middle, but we'll stop here for today because we're finished our daf and we will pick up with this tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.